This was written to commemorate the Battle of Bunker Hill, or Breed's Hill, if you've been. What? Okay.
Let tyrants shake their iron rod, and slavery play their galling chains. We fear them not, we trust in God. New England's God forever reigns. Howe and Burgoyne and Clinton too, with Prescott and Cornwallis joined, together plot our overthrow. In one infernal league combined, when God inspired us for the fight, their ranks were broken, their lines were forced, their ships were shattered in our sight, or swiftly driven from our coast. The foe comes on with haughty stride, our troops advance with martial noise, their veterans flee before our youth, and generals yield to fearless voice. What grateful offering shall we bring? What shall we render to the Lord? Loud hallelujahs let us sing, and praise His name on every chord.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to ask the people on the first panel to please join Diane at the front of the stage in these chairs. So thank you all for joining us on this very special occasion marking the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. And my name is Anastasia Battle. I'm Diane Sare's campaign manager. And I'm greeting everyone here in this room and also those watching us online, which there are many. We're here today not only to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States, but also to recommit to the principles in which this country was founded on. And there are many people who are confused about that. Unfortunately, there's been what John Quincy Adams had warned about of her seeking abroad monsters to destroy. That is what America has done as of late, and it's very understandable why many people are confused as to what the United States actually represents. It's not what we've done, and I know the people in this room feel it within themselves that we have to do something about that. If you have your Leonora, which you can find in the back room over here, which has a number of articles in here, which many of the speakers who are joining us today have written in. I'm just going to read the first part, right in the very back, the Declaration of Independence. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to that separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. We made this declaration, and a lot of people have a lot of reasons for why they think this declaration was made, a lot of practical reasons. But I'll read you just the first grievance that's written. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. Now, aren't we witnessing that right now? Haven't we been witnessing that for quite a while? This declaration inspired millions of people over the last 2.5 centuries. In fact, today is the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence for Venezuela. There's a wonderful article that you can find in the Executive Intelligence Review, which is written by Isabel Ramonet, and it's titled, "Why We Also Celebrate July 5th, the Collaboration of Patriots from Venezuela, the United States, and Mexico in the Pursuit of Happiness." And I just want to read a little bit of that declaration so you have a sense of just how people from around the world have actually viewed what this country represents. So their declaration, Venezuela's, starts off with, "When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation." People around the world know what this country was meant to do, and that's why they chose to follow that same path. So I want to encourage everyone in this room to recommit to these principles of the United States, to join Diane Sare's campaign, and to welcome all of the people who will be joining us today to give you more of a deeper sense of what this history really is, which traverses through many countries, many generations, and many eras to express the highest conceptions of mankind. That's what we're committing here today to do. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Lyndon LaRouche, who spoke. This is a video presentation from Lyndon LaRouche, an excerpt from July 3rd, 1982.
Tomorrow, I believe, is the 4th of July, a date which is not particularly well understood in world history, largely because of the way people in the United States celebrate it. But it should be remembered that this nation, despite what it has become, was created for a purpose which is no longer talked about in the classrooms and is generally unknown in the halls of Congress, and you can barely get it in through the cracks in the administration. Civilization was placed again in jeopardy in the period 1527 to 1653. Was placed in jeopardy by events which featured the Peasant War in Germany, which destroyed culture in South Germany, a Habsburg trick. It was destroyed by the sack of Rome by the Habsburgs, 1527. It was destroyed by a revival of the Inquisition. It was destroyed by the rise again of world conquest of usury, again a Venetian Genoese trick. It was destroyed by a Venetian Habsburg trick called the 30 Years' War, which decimated Central Europe and nearly destroyed the civilization which had been launched by the Golden Renaissance of the 15th century. Now, we had a few people that were functioning then. Some of them were centered about Richelieu, Tremblay, Mazarin, and Colbert in France. Another group, politically allied to it, were the forces which later became associated with John Milton. The Commonwealth Party, the Republican Party of England, which founded on this nation's shores the beginnings deliberately of a new republic, recruiting from England and from other parts of Europe the best parishes to create a model republic on these shores, whose purpose was, in the course of its development, to tilt the balance against the forces of Habsburg and the Venetians in the old world, to make possible the defeat of these forces of evil in the old world. But then, again, evil triumphed. Colbert was forced to retreat in France. And guess where civilization began blooming again while this development was going on in the United States? In Prussia. Now, if you look at Prussia in the 17th century, after the 30 Years' War, and look at it on a map, there is nothing about Prussian territory which would warrant Prussia becoming the great power it became in the course of the 18th century, and with a brief interruption into about the 1870s, when Prussia was sold down the river by Bismarck, and then destroyed a little bit later on. But Prussia was built on the active toleration of the great elector of Prussia, whose purpose was to recruit from France and from world Jewry immigrants to transform this desolate land of cabbage growers into a world power. And such were conditions. But in the middle of the 18th century, civilization was in jeopardy. The issues which had been dealt with in part in 1653 in the defeat of the Spanish Habsburg still existed. And then one day, in 1766, the leader of a bunch of American conspirators named Benjamin Franklin, who already had an established scientific reputation throughout Europe, went to England, and on the advice of Priestley and others said there's no hope that the American people cannot live under the same government with this bunch of degenerates that the British have become since the 1666 Restoration. That we must plot and conspire to make a new republic which repudiates everything that Britain stands for in law, in morality, in political and economic policy. So Franklin, with the support of his Commonwealth Party remnant friends in England, such as Joseph Priestley, and linking in due process with the Republicans of Scotland, as typified at one point in the process by John Paul Jones, and linking with the Republicans in Ireland, as typified at one point by Matthew Carey, he took himself to the continent of Europe, to France, to Germany, to Sweden, and so forth, and in that year organized a conspiracy, a transatlantic conspiracy, to create a model republic on these shores. Every force that was viable on the continent of Europe, from Petrograd in Russia, Linnaeus' circles in Sweden, the circles of Göttingen, the heirs of the Campanella in Italy, the political heirs, the heirs of Colbert in France, and the heirs of Gottfried Leibniz throughout Europe, rallied and said, we will create a new republic on American shores. And so that republic was created and formally established on July 4th, 1776. And with French technology, which at that time was the best in the world, with the aid of volunteers from Germany, from France, from Prussia, and elsewhere, and with the creation of a strategic alliance called the League of Armed Neutrality, which was created by the united international force of these republicans, we whipped the British.
All right, thank you, Lyndon LaRouche, for your wise words and constant development. Could we please mute the screen? Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Diane Sare, independent United States presidential candidate, to the stage.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. And Anastasia and I did not plan to be wearing the same color. But I guess it's good to have a campaign manager that's in sync with you. We also didn't plan to both use certain excerpts in our opening remarks, but I'm going to go ahead and I would ask people to please read along with me the first two paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. So let's go. And passionately, please, because we have a heck of a fight ahead of us. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate but equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Thank you. So here we are. By the skin of our teeth and the grace of God, our nation has survived its first 250 years. However, I'm not sure that what we have become today would be recognizable by those who gave so much to create our republic, from Joan of Arc to George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Gouverneur Morris, and so many thousands of others, through Abraham Lincoln and our slain President John F. Kennedy. Lyndon LaRouche would recognize us, and he would say, "I told you you were headed for this. Now will you please bury Wall Street and the City of London?" Today we politely call them the Epstein class. So this is what we are going to have to do. We know what to do. At least I know what to do, but it will require a radical break from people's assumptions that money has something to do with economy. It also requires what General Douglas MacArthur called for, a spiritual recrudescence, a change in our moral outlook to once again value the human being as the center of God's created universe. Thankfully, we have an American Pope who understands this very well. We also have conscience, and that conscience has been awakened by the children of Gaza, the Palestinian people and their children who have been subjected to unimaginable crimes, have awakened the conscience of billions of people around the world, particularly younger people in the United States, but not only younger people, as we see from changes among people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, and others. The crimes of the Epstein Anglo-Zionist class are so extreme that they are causing a political realignment in the United States and Europe. They are trying to ascribe it to a communist upsurge, but it is actually a resurgence of human dignity and compassion. Will it be soon enough to stop thermonuclear war? That's the purpose of my campaign for the presidency. Somebody has to provide some leadership in this mess. The driver of this destruction is the impending doom of the $2.5 quadrillion bubble of derivatives obligations, sucking every last breath of life out of the real economy while it speculates on perpetual war to keep itself afloat. The Epstein class financiers think that they can hold on a little bit longer by cracking down on free speech, freedom of association, and feed the bubble with astronomical expenditures and future expenditures on weapons and weapons of mass destruction. That is why they actually cannot afford for any war to ever end. And on the 250th anniversary of our independence, are brazenly proposing that the United States merge our military and intelligence functions in an irreversible way with the Epstein class-run state of Israel. These billionaires, plus now one trillionaire, we have a trillionaire, I hope everyone's happy about that, believe that they are the modern day gods of Olympus, and that the very universe must bow to their will. They do not know such a concept as natural law. They do not know what a boundary condition is. They don't understand that the future is not determined by a linear projection of the past and present. There is an ordering principle in the universe in which everything is contained as the sphere defines the limits of the polyhedra. When you run up against a boundary condition defined by universal principles, everything changes. Take water, for example. You can raise the temperature slowly or quickly, and from 42 degrees to 87 degrees, the water, it's just water and it's getting warmer. But once you pass 100 degrees Celsius or 212 degrees Fahrenheit, suddenly it is not water anymore. It disappears. It's a gas. If you lower the temperature of water, it gets colder and colder, but once you go below 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius, suddenly water is no longer a liquid. It's a solid, and all of its properties are different. President Trump might wish to consider this when he says how hot the US economy is. So the British have an idea that if they push President Putin hard enough in this linear projection way, he is simply going to back down and come begging on his hands and knees to His Royal Highness, King Charles, begging subserviently for admission to the European Union. I can assure everyone here that that will not happen. Let me remind everyone that President Putin was very clear in February of 2022 when Russia began the special military operation to remind the world that Russia had suffered particularly two famous invasions from Napoleon and Adolf Hitler, the latter of which took 1 out of every 6 Russian people. And despite the loss of 27 million people, Russia, the Soviet Union, then Russia, emerged victorious, and they have no intention of being defeated today, particularly not in a neo-Nazi, NATO-backed operation. China is a different case. They also lost tens of million people during World War II, largely at the hands of the fascist Japanese. They also suffered terrible losses under the British Opium Wars. And they call this period the century of humiliation. China has no intention of being humiliated again. So far, we haven't been so foolhardy as to start a war with China, and they right now look at us from the perspective of 5,000 years of history with a mixture of pity and empathy. And when you talk to them, they say things like, "We had bad periods too." So we are at a breaking point. We are at a boundary condition where everything is going to change. It is a moment when actions of individuals in accordance with natural law can move mountains. That is why I launched my campaign for the presidency now, because we have the opportunity to shape history for the next 250 years or longer. Now, Lyndon LaRouche, whom we heard from earlier, devised this function, the triple curve, to show you a breaking point in the physical economy. And I do have to say there seems to be something in the political domain which is a little similar, which is the more money that AIPAC gives their candidates, the more likely they are to lose the election. But if you take the triple curve, you can say it says 1968, that until about 1971 when the dollar was decoupled from gold, the gold reserve system, you had a relation. This was not 3 curves, it was 1 curve. If you invested in your industry and manufacturing, the stock market went up, the economy got better, there was a relationship. Once you said, oh no, floating exchange rates, you can gamble on money, you can bet on the futures, what happened was it separated so that literally the more money going into the gambling, you are sucking money out of the physical economy, which is why the higher the stock market goes, the worse the economy is, the worse the physical economy is. And what happened, as you see on the far right, is what LaRouche called a shock front, a boundary condition, like when a plane goes past the speed of sound. Everything is different. There's a change. We had a crash in 2008. The crash ahead will be much greater and very different than that because now we have fewer banks holding more money than we did in 2008. However, it won't hit everyone equally because we have so brilliantly imposed sanctions and tariffs and bludgeoned all these nations and thrown them out of the SWIFT system that we're going to be hit much harder than some other nations, which are making other arrangements with the BRICS countries and so on.
Need to join it from.
If I were president of the United States right now, I would put this entire bubble through a bankruptcy reorganization. Unfortunately, I'm not. So we're going to have to wait either until the crash hits, or we are so close to the crash hitting that people panic and realize that we have to do something radically different. And that is to return to the American system of political economy as initiated by Alexander Hamilton. Hello. And advanced by Lyndon LaRouche, which means we have to reinstate the Glass-Steagall Act and we have to separate the banks according to function. No more socialism for speculators. There will be a wall between the normal commercial banks and speculative activity, which will not be housed under the same roof or managed by the same individuals. As we develop our sound and transparent commercial banking system, our national bank, which will have replaced the bankrupt Federal Reserve, will be able to issue large amounts of credit for the purpose of massively increasing the productivity of the American workforce. We will turn swords into plowshares and retool all of our military companies, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing. In fact, Boeing might even be able to make an airplane that works. Their weapons don't even work. It's absurd. It's just to make money and kill people. There are certain projects that I think will help inspire younger generations and cause our nation to build the big infrastructure that we need. One of them is the Bering Strait Tunnel, connecting the Eurasian landmass with the North American landmass under the Bering Strait. Building this will mean that we will then have to upgrade and modernize our national rail grid. We need 42,000 miles of new modern rail. Some of you getting here today experienced the bliss of the highly functional American rail system, not. Think what that would do. Also, I have to say that if you think of that map, building this tunnel will change the orientation of our nation. We right now orient to our east, to the dead, crazy European nations, and we will have, speaking after me, some Europeans who are not as crazy as their leaders, or their official leaders, but we should orient toward Asia. That's where all the growth is. That's the fun part of the planet right now, and then ultimately Africa. So the next continent-wide project is NWAPA, the North American Water and Power Alliance. It is insane in the year 2026 that we do not know how to manage water. Water has a relationship to gravity. That is, if I held up a glass of water and emptied it, I'm not on the International Space Station. Everyone knows the water would go down. The Army Corps of Engineers have mapped every millimeter of our continent's surface. So the idea that we are having droughts and floods, and it's actually insane. This was a project designed in 1964, I believe, by Parsons Engineering. It was championed actually by Senator Frank Moss and Robert Kennedy when he was in the US Senate, and picked up later by LaRouche. LaRouche was proposing that we also include nuclear power to pump the water up, but what you see is an enormous amount of water, rain hits mountains in Alaska and just runs back off into the Pacific, never gets used. If you were to pump that into the Rocky Mountain Trench and then look at the areas, you could literally irrigate the entire western half of the United States. There's a complementary program of this that extends into Mexico. We could clean out the Great Lakes, flush out the St. Lawrence Seaway, have a navigable canal across, and obviously it would employ millions of people. And I would say both of these things, the Bering Strait Tunnel and Nawapa, would serve very much to unify our nation and inspire young people. Once our water supply is under control, then our farmers will be able to function much more happily. And our friend Bob Baker, who's not here yet, has a program which I endorse to create 1 million new family farms. And I would say not 1 million mega conglomerate eat petroleum byproduct, mega whatever they are, farms, and certainly not solar farms and wind farms. Those are not farms. And then finally, we need a plan to colonize Mars. And this will force us to finally develop fusion energy and will also force us to make badly needed discoveries in biological sciences and terraforming. A bold revival of the space program will also inspire millions of American children who will suddenly become interested in learning how to read and learning advanced mathematics and physics in order to be able to participate. The quest for fusion energy and the colonization of Mars are not just the project or property of the United States, but are the domain of the entire human race. China and Russia are already planning a nuclear-powered industrial base on the moon. The nations of Africa are full of young people who have rejected colonialism and are not returning to it. The continent of Africa will have 2.5 billion people on it by 2050. And the most natural thing would be for the United States to be collaborating with Russia, with China, and with these African nations for the industrial development of that continent. Rather than threatening nations in South America who wish to work with China to good advantage, the United States should also work with the nations of Brazil, Peru, Argentina, Mexico, Panama, Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti, and many others, and all of the nations south of our border. It is not in the interest of the United States, the people of the United States, to impoverish nations and encourage drug cartel activity, which is what Wall Street and the City of London have been doing for decades. And I would remind people that the two presidents, particularly who had that perspective, Garfield and McKinley, were both assassinated. Like it or not, all of us here today must accept responsibility for the fact that our nation, established here in Philadelphia 250 years ago, even in our morally bankrupt and economically bankrupt condition, has an enormous influence in the world. At the moment, that influence is primarily destructive, and the threat of destruction, the expression peace through strength, which every Nazi always said. But we could also have great influence for the good. We owe it to the millions who sacrificed over centuries that such a nation might exist, and to the millions who have perished because of our sins, and to the billions not yet born, to return to the principles of our founding. And the words of Cotton Mather and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, that every injustice and obstacle in our path presents an opportunity to do the good, and we should seize that opportunity. Thank you.
That's my president. Thank you very much, Diane Sare, for your opening remarks and really setting the bar very high for what the president should be in the country. Next, I'd like to bring up Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Helga Zepp-LaRouche, welcome.
Hello. Hello. I full-heartedly greet all of you, and I congratulate you as true Americans, as the true representatives of the Republic of America, which has its 250th birthday today. And I want to thank in particular you, Diane, to run as an independent presidential candidate representing the vision and the program of my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, and for having organized this event, which without any exaggeration is for sure one of the handful of outstanding celebrations upholding the true principles of the American Revolution, and that in an ocean of travesties and banalizations of that historic watershed. To set the record straight of what this American Revolution was and what happened to its tradition and memory in order to revive its principles, not only for the United States, but for the entire world, we are conducting this event today. And indeed, the revival of the principles of the American Revolution, or the effort to try to do so, comes not one moment too early, because the world is truly on the edge of the abyss. The danger of a global nuclear war has never been so close, much more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis, with two regional theaters of war in danger of spinning out of control. The world, as it was created in large part also by the United States, in the post-war period, the period of the Cold War, when there were two blocks, and the post-Cold War order, all of this has disintegrated. The attempt to create an unipolar world order, the illusion that the United States could forever be the world hegemon, which in reality was from the beginning based on the Anglo-American special relationship, suffered a gigantic blowback. As a result, the world is now in a complete disarray, chaos. The famous quote by President Trump, "International law is not needed," has indeed helped to shatter the entire order. Now, the problem is that when the Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991, it did so amazingly peacefully. No tanks, no shooting, just a transformation with little incidents, but essentially peaceful, including the German unification. I don't think anybody believes that if the United States would disintegrate, which it is very close to, indeed, in terms of the financial bubble blowing out, I do not think that the United States would dissolve equally peacefully like the Soviet Union did. So therefore, the candidacy of you, Diane, is of the utmost strategic importance. Now, the big question many people are asking themselves, in part desperately around the world, where is there a way out? Because the role and the future of the United States is the most important, maybe the only important factor, maybe one of the most important factor to decide this question. Now, on the 14th of April of this year, an open letter was published in response to the renewed unprovoked war of aggression against Iran by the US and Israel, which was signed by many excellent people. Many of them have been working with us in the IPC, and whose moral and intellectual integrity is above any doubt. First slide, please. The text goes in part to the peoples of the world, to thinkers, to scholars, and to those who believe in justice. For 249 years, spanning the entirety of its existence since 1776, the United States built a record of atrocity that belonged to a darker pre-civilized age. The predatory empire erected on the corpses of nations from the genocide of nearly
Who wrote
5
this?
million. This is the advertised in the open letter I just quoted. Nearly 5 million indigenous people, to the brutal enslavement of 4 million Africans, to the lynching of more than 4,000 black citizens under Jim Crow. Well, if that orientation, calling it the entirety of its existence, were accurate, then there would be very little hope for the planet, if any at all. The problem is that the real history of America is not known. There was a recent poll by the Cato Institute, which admittedly is not exactly a humanist institution, but nevertheless, they found in this poll that only 39% of Generation Z linked the celebration to the Declaration of Independence. Nearly half, 46% of the entire population, did not know what the 250th birthday is actually celebrating. 53% linked it to the Declaration of Independence, however. 77% knew that George Washington was the first president, but 58% said that they do not know what the main purpose of the US Constitution is all about. Now, these figures are probably worse for the two houses of Congress, because otherwise it would not have been possible that they gave 12 standing ovations to King Charles when he recently addressed the two houses of the Congress. He claimed that the American constitutionalism grew out of an older Anglo-British constitutional tradition. And even if he did not mention the philosophers, it was clear who were behind the argument: John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and Mandeville, and others. Now, King Charles just stole the entire American history. He ironed out the American Revolution altogether, and these congressmen and senators did not even realize. Now, I want to state here in all clarity, because this is not a self-evident truth, unfortunately, that the American Revolution was an absolute break with the oligarchical system of Europe at the time, with the monarchies, with feudalism. And if you look at the long arc of human history, I would compare it not with the first landing on the moon by the Apollo mission in 1969, but an event a little bit earlier, the ascent of Yuri Gagarin, when on the 12th of April, 1961, he left Earth for the first time for 108 minutes. It was the first step of mankind into space. And this was a total revolution, because it was not clear before if the human body could cope with weightlessness and if the technology to lift men into space would actually function. Now, the Declaration of Independence is in that sense a revolutionary non-linear phase shift. And even if it was mentioned already, let me repeat again. In the Declaration of Independence, it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem the most likely to affect their safety and happiness." This was an absolute watershed. The idea that all men are created equal, that they have God-given unalienable rights, that government is legitimate only with the consent of the governed, was regarded as a complete outrage. Most accounts of the American Revolution only mention that it was somehow about tea and taxes, and that the American wanted to take the rightful income away from the British. No, it was the first time that the sovereign was we the people. For the British colonial powers, this was an absurd idea. Tony Chatkin, whom we hear in a little while, quotes in his book, Who We Are, the British response, which was an answer to the Declaration of the American Congress, namely a 4-page essay written by Jeremy Bentham, who became in the following years the most important intelligence operative for Lord Shelburne, who was later the British Prime Minister from 1782 to 83. Bentham, called their theory of government absurd and visionary. He wrote, "What they call self-evident truth, all men, they tell us, are created equal. This rarity is a new discovery. Now, for the first time, we learn that a child at the moment of its birth has the same quantity of natural power as the parent, the same quantity of political power as the magistrate." Now, the reason for this hysterical reaction was that the Declaration of Independence went at the core of the oligarchical, imperial, and colonial system. When all men are created equal, then there is nobody a king or a princess or a lord or an earl or any other of these superfluous positions. The whole idea of nobility, it's not just a matter of opinion. The idea was involved that most people are slaves, underlings, subjects, and that only the nobility has privileges, that the whole society is organized in such a way to serve the privileges of a few. Now, Joseph de Maistre, who was a writer for the oligarchy in the 19th century, basically had the most outrageous description in his letter to a Russian prince. He wrote that nobility is the only ones who are good by nature. They have God-given rights, while the masses are evil. They tend to commit crimes and therefore must be controlled and suppressed by a strong state run by the monarchy. He famously said that the executioner is the actual fundament of the order of society. Now, the problem is people do not appreciate what a watershed the American Revolution really was because they are not educated in history. That they are not educated is an intention, because if people don't know history, they can't judge the present. Until the 15th century, maybe all over the world, but for sure in Europe, all forms of government were oligarchical. That is, that only a small elite had their privileges, and they kept the masses of people deliberately backward, because the more stupid people were, the more easy it would be to run the government. It was actually an enormous and long and difficult process of shedding that system of oligarchy and arriving at the nation state, establishing sovereignty. It took actually centuries before, out of these supranational structures of empire, such as the Roman Empire and the papacy, came a long and very tedious evolution then in the notion of the sovereign state. This happened politically the first time in France with the government of Louis XI, from 1461 to 83. And in that reign of Louis XI's the income of the population in 20 years actually doubled. Now, at the same time, there was Nicolaus of Cusa, who is without any question the greatest thinker of the 15th century, and his revolutionary writings in many fields, in natural science, in law, in philosophy, actually mark the beginning of modern times. And one of his actual first major work was the Concordancia Catholica. Now, in book 2, chapter 14, he wrote, and the headline of that chapter is The Basic Ideas, which contain the basic ideas which later come out in the Declaration of Independence. The headline is, All legislation is based on natural law. Since by nature we are all equally free, all coercive power is derived from the election and consent of the subjects. The jurisdiction such created is not valid in itself unless it is in accordance with the law and the canon. For since we are all by nature free, every governance, whether it consists in a written law or is a living law in the person of a prince, by which subjects are compelled to abstain from evil deeds and their freedom directed towards the good through fear of punishment, can only come from the agreement and consent of the subjects. For if by nature men are created equal in power and are equally free, the true properly ordered authority of one common ruler who is their equal in power cannot be naturally established except by the election and consent of the others, and law is established by consent. Now, this was an absolute revolution. This was the first time this was written in such clarity, and it is one of these watersheds, because without Nicolaus having said these things and written them down, the long road to the American Declaration of Independence would have been impossible. He continues that idea in book 3 of the Concordancia in chapter 4, where the idea of the representative system of government appears for the first time. Quote, summarizing what has been said above, all legitimate authority arises from the elective concordance and free submission. There is in the people a divine seed by virtue of their common equal birth and the equal natural rights of all men, so that all authority which comes from God, as does man himself, is recognized as divine when it arises from the common consent of the subjects. One who is established in authority as a representative of the will of all may be called a public or common person, the father of all, ruling without haughtiness or pride in a lawful and legitimate established government, while recognizing himself as the creature, as it were, of all his subjects as a collectivity. Let him act as their father, as individuals. This is the divinely ordained marital state of spiritual union based on a lasting harmony by which a commonwealth is best guided in the fullness of peace towards the goal of eternal bliss. Now, this idea of representative government is a key characteristic of the Republic. Then in book 3, chapter 7, 12, he writes, he actually describes for the first time a system based on meritocracy. That's extremely interesting, because you can think where in the world today are actually governments based on meritocracy. He writes, for the king ought to preside over a council in which matters pertaining to the government of the commonwealths are discussed, and he ought to decide each matter by consent, with the council of the nobles and bishops subject to him. For this purpose, the ruler should have the best qualified of all the subjects chosen from all parts of the realm to participate in a daily council with him. These councillors ought to represent all the inhabitants of the realm in the same way as it was described above concerning the cardinals who assist the Roman pontiff. These councillors ought to constantly defend the good of the public which they represent, giving advice and serving as the appropriate means through which the king can govern and influence his subjects, and the subjects on proper occasions can influence him in return. The great strength of the kingdom comes from this daily council. The councillors should be appointed to the task by agreement in a general meeting of the kingdom, and they should be publicly bound legally by oath to speak openly for the public good. Now that is really a watershed, and it is not generally known. I mean, it is attributed that Nicolaus of Cusa was generally, it's described as far ahead of his time by developing ideas which later became known, but the true significance of what he developed in terms of the development of a true republic must be emphasized much, much, much more. Because these ideas of natural freedom, consent of the government, representation through election and meritocracy, it took actually 343 years and traveled through many thinkers, scholars, and writings to become politically effective in the Declaration of Independence. Together with the idea of the peaceful coexistence of religions, which he develops in this beautiful Socratic dialogue, De Pace Fide, about peace in religion, and the absolutely breathtaking revolutionary concept of the coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposite, namely that the one is of a higher magnitude than the many, as a method of thinking and conflict resolution, represents the watershed to modernity. It is actually a beautiful historic coincidence that with Pope Leo XIV, the first American pope in history, these ideas have been powerfully highlighted when the Pope received the 38th Medal of Liberty 2 days ago in Philadelphia, where he, actually, quoted the Declaration of Independence and, told people that they absolutely have to make a commitment to uphold these ideas again. So that is the idea content by Nicolaus influencing the Declaration of Independence and de facto the Constitution. But Cusanus was also indirectly involved in another way related to the American Revolution. He had a lifelong friendship of over 40 years with Paolo dal Pozzo Toscanelli, who was a very famous doctor in medicine, astronomer, mathematician, and cartographer, they studied together basically overlapping 4 years from 1417 to 23 in the great university town of Padua, which was both a center of the network of scientists and philosophers who basically had a great influence and created an incredibly creative climate around the Italian Renaissance and the Council of Florence. Toscanelli significantly influenced the mathematical ideas of Cusanus, and Nicolaus, vice versa, totally influenced Toscanelli's overall method of thinking. Out of that came the idea, which was discussed by all educated Europeans in the 15th century, to possibly reach Asia, the land of spices and many other goods, by ship eastward. Not eastward, but westward. There were many famous maps, which by especially Toscanelli, who reflected Nicolaus's method of thinking of the infinity and the coincidence of opposites as the crucial context to develop such new ideas of the world order. Toscanelli wrote to Fernando Martinez, who was the canon of law in Lisbon in 1474, 10 years after Cusa had died, and Toscanelli actually was at the deathbed of Nicolaus and had a big influence in his testament. So in 10 years later, 1474, Toscanelli wrote to Fernando Martinez, who was a close ally and collaborator of the Portuguese king Alfonso V. And he also wrote to Columbus in 1480, urging them to realize this project of basically financing the sailing west to reach the east, with the idea that this would be a much faster route. Next slides, here you can see the different maps of Toscanelli. Now, one difficulty when you are researching this is that much of the records have disappeared, especially on almost all of Toscanelli's life work. But Nicolaus definitely mentioned Toscanelli in his dialogue on the quadrature of the circle, and he referred to Fernando Martinez, at least as a background figure in the dialogue De non aliud, on the non-other. Now, when Columbus arrived in the Americas, actually on an island in the Bahamas on the 12th October of 1492, he believed that he had reached islands near the Indies. Now, the early Spanish and Portuguese reports are the same. They all report that, these were islands close to India. And only with Amerigo Vespucci, there came the doubt, because Vespucci realized that the coastline of what was found was actually much too large for it to be Asia. So in his letters, he called it Mundus Novus, the New World. And you all have a memory of the beautiful Symphony of a New World by Anthony Dvorak. And you remember the incredibly beautiful poem by Friedrich Schiller, Columbus, which has the idea that, it is the intuitive idea, sort of prescience, which led Columbus to discover America. Now, it was only in 1507 that the German cartographer Martin Waldseemüller published a world map, which he labeled for the first time the new continent America, after Amerigo Vespucci. Next slide. Well, we will hear from other speakers what other ideas and fights shaped the history of this America. If George III went crazy over the loss of the American colony, or if he had only, quote, recurring episodes, remains to be researched more fully. In any case, the British never gave up the idea of undoing the American Revolution. They did that first militarily with the War of 1812. They supported the Confederacy in the Civil War against the Union. And when they realized that the American colony could not be reconquered militarily, they decided to try to do that through subversion by convincing the American establishment to adopt the model of the British Empire as the basis of their common rule of the world, the special relationship. H.G. Wells, in his Open Conspiracy, describes that very clearly. And unfortunately, one has to say, this conspiracy has been pretty successful. Now, today, the collective West is run by a financial oligarchy, which is modeled on the British Empire, and it tramples on the principles of the Declaration of Independence. Therefore, Diane Sare's presidential campaign must succeed to restore the core ideas of the Declaration of Independence, the American system of the economy of Alexander Hamilton, the foreign policy of John Quincy Adams, and above all, the vision of Lyndon LaRouche of a just new world economic order, of cooperation with the global South as equal partners, echoing the policies of Franklin D. Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy. Therefore, the best dialogue, or the dialogue of the best contributions of all great cultures and civilization, is an integral part of Diane's campaign. Therefore, we have to work with Diane internationally to correct the mistaken characterization of America as 250 years of an unbroken chain of atrocities by bringing the United States back to the high ideals which were declared, among other things, in the first War of Independence, the first anti-colonial war in history. Now, the Declaration of Independence declares the rights of all people in the world. When I created the Schiller Institute, I deliberately chose the text of the Declaration of Independence by only changing 5 or 6 words to make it applicable to the whole world. And in that sense, basically, that it becomes the constitution and the platform for the entire new order we are creating. So I, as a world citizen and patriot, but first world citizen, full-heartedly endorse Diane for president. And I call on all people of goodwill from all over the world to do likewise. Thank you.
Ideas come from and for the work that you've done towards these universal principles. Next, I'd like to bring up Jacques Cheminade, who is a friend from France and the head of the Solidarité et Progress Party. Please, go ahead, Jacques. Jacques, are you there?
Yes.
Please go ahead. You have the floor.
Okay. So, my best to all of you. Make the American Revolution universal again. Making the American Revolution universal again is a mission of all American patriots and world citizens. Presidential candidate Diane Sare has taken up this crucial challenge. Without hesitation, in her own way, for she is a person of character for whom understanding, judging, and acting for the cause of her country and humanity is more than a duty. It is her very identity, a reflection of both her heart and her reason. Alas, apart from her closer friends and political families, I see practically no other American citizen with this quality of character. But I am certain that her candidacy will inspire, and is already inspiring, hundreds, thousands, or even millions to rise to this level. Your history, the history that gave birth to your republic, is a very proof of this. Creating a country from scratch, a republic, a true republic, required a change in mindset, as Helga Zepp-LaRouche has just shown us. And, of course, as it is now our challenge. However, on this 250th anniversary of your independence, your representatives have betrayed their ancestors, their founding fathers, as you call them. And the time has then come for you, for all of us, to pull ourselves together. If Diane Sare fails to do so, along with all those who support her, and first and foremost, Jose Vega, I see no way by which all of us, Americans and citizens of other countries, can prevent another world war, risking the annihilation of humanity and or an economic collapse triggered by the collapse of the Ponzi scheme built on the insane speculation of the City of London and Wall Street. Because the decisive challenge lies within the United States, not in itself, but as a key factor in world history. What dominates the US today is far worse than what Eisenhower announced in 1961. It is now a financially crippled techno-military financial complex with its $2.4 quadrillion of monthly counterfeit currency, whose fictitious value they want to maintain by governance through fear. As they say, govern through fear. All the Silicon Valley people think that way. The warlords of the Silicon Valley and Wall Street make no secret of this, hoping that their power, accelerated by use of artificial intelligence and violent repression, will allow them to govern once again through fear, by crushing their enemies. This is no longer about the United States of America. It is about a mutation of the British system, the control of a greater America proclaimed by Trump and desired by his entourage of multi-billionaires, stretching from Greenland to the Tierra del Fuego, corresponds to the will to stupefy and corrupt them, as Hieronymus Bosch depicted in his time, by immersing them in artificial earthly paradises. Pope Leo XIV, in his first encyclica, aptly describes a colonization of minds orchestrated by those who design the algorithms, capture the data, and control the narratives. In print and on television for the older generation, and on social media for the younger, brainstorming has become the modus operandi of those who wield power over their subjects. We are in that way all subjected to brainwashing, and I am certain that the wise words of Diane Sare can be, if we so choose, the best of disinfectants. Lying has become the modus operandi. They don't even try to hide it anymore. Donald Trump's reception of King Charles III of England was blatant proof of this. The king viciously presented the history of American independence as a consequence of the British system of thought, as if history could be manipulated like a game in a gambling den, saying the opposite of the truth with a smug smile. And Donald Trump, as they say in deep sea fishing, took the bait and doubled down. I want to show with this slide how it is seen in France. The slide. No. The first one. Well, let's continue. It shows Trump and Charles, and they said, wasn't it a mistake? So it's the ambiguity of cartoons. He said, was it a mistake to what they say, to quote what they say, or was it a mistake to pretend that American independence comes from the British thought? So if you consult ChatGPT, you will learn that the precursors of the American Revolution were John Locke, Voltaire, Isaac Newton, the Magna Carta, and English constitutional traditions. Nothing, of course, about Leibniz and his concept of the pursuit of happiness, the joy of discovering the created universe, the laws of the created world. Nothing on the inspiration of Benjamin Franklin, nothing, of course, on Cusa, and everything on Locke's life, liberty, and property, as if the selfish conception of goods could be one of the inalienable rights of man and the foundation of the Republic. These questions are fundamental because they shape our way of thinking. Diane Sare is more aware of this than anyone, as she has said on several occasions. It is her work with Lyndon LaRouche that enlightened her mind and inspired her commitment. And Diane Sare, like everyone around her, is a very, very hard worker. I therefore ask in her name from all of you that you help her. Just as Charles de Gaulle, General Charles de Gaulle, in France was helped by his people to liberate France from Nazi occupation. Because what is happening in the world is a return to a system of domination imposed by forces of the same kind, a financial feudalism resuming a modus operandi on a Western scale, of the whole West, what is called the world minority, but this minority is a very dangerous snake who has an impulse to bite. There is therefore an urgent need for people of Diane's character, driven by a grand purpose and not by opportunism of seizing power. I simply want to say a word about what the French press calls a surge of the radical left in the United States. Let me warn you, the newly elected Democrats in New York, Colorado, and elsewhere are not communist, as Donald Trump accuses them to be. But whatever their intentions, they are not offering a fundamental alternative and are merely campaigning to oust the incumbents. What is important is a groundswell that is emerging among the people of the United States, of which Diane is a potential catalyst, and which you must make real to let this wave toward a return to universalism and the principle of the best of the 18th century insurgents. With a vision, a purpose, and the courage of Diane Sare and Jose Vega to brandish them publicly, facing their adversaries and enemies, stirring up a healthy tension, not a desire of revenge. When I think of July 4th, what comes to my mind, is Benjamin Franklin traveling throughout Europe to rally the necessary world majority for the anti-colonial cause, especially in France. Alexandre de La Rochefoucauld being elected a member of Benjamin Franklin's Philosophical Society. James Monroe being received in Paris by the convention as a colleague in 1794. James Madison, George Washington, Thomas Paine being made honorary French citizens, along with Friedrich Schiller and also G.B. Priestley. And finally, what comes to my mind on July 4th is July 4th, 1852, and then April 14, 1852, and then 1876 is when Frederick Douglass addressed his people, and finally Ulysses Grant, present on the Douglas April 14 speech, when Ulysses Grant, supporting the 15th Amendment, has extended the right to vote to all male citizens in the United States, unconditionally, without distinction of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. I should add that Frederick Douglass was a great advocate for women's suffrage, which had to wait until 1920 in the United States and 1944 in France. Today, Diane Sare is a true heir in this struggle through her ideas, through her commitment to ideas. and to the history of her country and the history of the whole people who raised the head to save humanity. Now, if I compare what I have just said with the official celebrations of the 250th anniversary in your country, the contrast is for us terrifying. Not only is its organization sloppy, lacking any guiding principle, but it is dedicated to celebrating a man who seeks to imprint his name everywhere. Whereas George Washington in 1790, despite enjoying enormous popularity, retired after 2 presidencies, refusing to found a dynasty and warning, in his farewell address, against partisanship and the impostures of a so-called patriotism. Today, the president, his children, and his inner circle are enriching themselves through speculation, just as before Nancy Pelosi and her husband did. But with Trump, it's on a higher scale, a higher level. It's a domination by a group sharing relentlessly financial speculation, from insider trading on what remains of the markets, because it's becoming not markets, but a betting place. And at the same time, blurring the ideological lines by building a new White House, a new ballroom in the White House, and hosting mixed martial arts events right across the building. As we see it, current presidency is merely the culmination of a moral decay that began with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. It is by grasping the full extent of this destructive dynamic beyond the labels of Democrats or Republicans that Diane Sare returns to the initial contributions and conditions of her country. These original intentions, more than anyone else, we French share with you and with all the citizens of the world who contributed to the creation of your republic. I must tell you 2 things here. First, the United States is, as we see it, not an Anglo-Saxon country, but a melting pot of peoples from around the world asking for a better and seeking for a better life, all men made equal and asking and demanding for freedom. A republic that does not seek to find monsters elsewhere to wage war against, but rather to set its commitment to the common good of all as an example. Second, your unique characteristic is that you were the first republic founded on the consent of its citizens and the support of an international American party, without which your independence could never have been achieved. You have the merit to have organized this American party in the whole world. Militarily, the decisive Battle of Yorktown was won by the approximately 8,000, 9,000 probably, soldiers commanded by George Washington, allied with a French army of about 7,000 soldiers commanded by the Comte de la Rochefoucauld, de la Rochambeau, by the Comte de Rochambeau. And it was the French fleet, commanded by Admiral de Grasse, which in Chesapeake Bay prevented the British army from landing reinforcements that could have changed the course of the battle. Within the American army itself were, of course, the Marquis de Lafayette, Tadeusz Kosciuszko, and many others. However, it was the Prussian General von Stauffen who then organizing the crucial training of the insurgents at Valley Forge, bringing to them both his expertise and his determination, his unwavering determination. Financially, it was the Bourbons of France and Spain, Louis XVI and Carlos III, who provided the millions of pounds needed. In France, Beaumarchais created a sham trading company under the name Rodrigue, Hortalez and Company, whose ships sailed from Bordeaux, Le Havre, and Marseille in France towards the Caribbean and then to the United States. The anti-British members of the special services, Le Secret du Roi in France, also supported the American Revolution, the latter benefiting in this way from money, credit, weapons, ammunition, and engineers from the Corps of Engineers, in particular in France. Intellectually, as Benjamin Franklin strove to organize it, the American Party was from Europe, tipping the scales when monarchs hesitated to commit themselves too fully to this republic, which they feared might have spread to their own people. Lazare Carnot met Franklin. Today in France, we have adopted his motto in our newspaper, Nouvelle Solidarité, to raise all individuals of the human species to the dignity of humankind. Carnot was both a poet, he drew his inspiration from Schiller, and a physicist. Mozart also belonged to the circles, as illustrated by his attack on the feudal and predatory behavior of Don Juan. In Spain, the Ilustrados supported the American Revolution, as did the Colbertists Gaspar Melchior de Jovellanos and Pedro Rodriguez. Campomanes and the French banker of Basque origin, Francisco Cabarrús, played a key role. The latter, Cabarrús, founded the Banco San Carlos, a public credit institution with a public service mission, for which it pooled private money, private capitals from Spain, France, and even from the Netherlands. The great painter Francisco de Goya was part of this same circle. He was even a shareholder in the Banco de San Carlos. He portrayed Cabarrús and other banks' directors. This bank served as a model that later inspired Alexander Hamilton to create the first national bank of the United States. Moreover, in India, Tipu Sultan, or Tipu Sahib, of Mysore, of the state of Mysore, fought alongside his father and, upon succeeding him, against the British East India Company. He not only sent 3 ambassadors to Louis XVI in France to forge an alliance with France, but also supported the Association of French Republicans based in its capital, Srirangapatna, and there they organized for the American Revolution. While indirect, this effectively created an Indo-French-American front, as the tenacity of the sultans of Mysore, and sometimes their victories, partly diverted the British from the American front. Later, Indian thinkers and activists became directly interested in the examples on the American anti-colonial struggle and the French effort to defend their sovereignty from the British. In short, the American Revolution was far more universal than I myself imagined before living it with my American friends and experiencing the idea of a fraternity in which each person contributes a voice, singing in harmony with the others. Diane understands that Pope Leo XIV and President Xi Jinping share this worldview, what Vladimir Putin called a polyphony of nations, which should allow us to escape from a confrontation of blocs, between blocs. The United States must not only be part of this, but become a driving force, along, I hope, with France, as soon as we have expelled the financial, technological, and military occupiers from our countries. It is on this point that I particularly agree with Diane Sare. At this point in my presentation, some of you may think that I am interfering in the internal affairs of another state, contrary to the principles of international law. I reply that, on the contrary, as a patriot and citizen of the world, I must intervene in American history, just as those who answered Benjamin Franklin's call. For the American Revolution was, in its impetus, a universal conspiracy, and as Lyndon LaRouche explained before, and in its execution, it was a common struggle. Given the threats facing the world today, far greater than in that time, we must intervene globally. We are all in the same boat, and we must quickly abandon this boat before it becomes a vessel adrift or a ship for fools. The time has come for each of us to take the helm, or at least to assist those who have the courage to do so for the common good. We must achieve victory in order to change the current global environment, because no problem, no crisis can any longer be resolved separately and sustainably. I know that Diane knows this, and that those who respect and support her know it too. You might wonder why, after the American Revolution, the alliance of American patriots and humanists from across Europe and the world did not lead to peace and mutual progress. It's an excellent question for today. The answer is that the behavior and principles of British colonialism, not having been eradicated once and for all then, continued to infect the world. Faced with a country's dire financial situation, American leaders entered into preliminary trade agreements with London, and as early as 1794, authorized the Royal Navy to confiscate French goods aboard American ships. In response, the convention blockaded American vessels in French ports and authorized privateers to seize them at sea. A virtual Franco-American war ensued, lasting 6 years. British agents tried by all means to prevent a French-American alliance by stirring up opposition and factional conflicts within each camp. Thus, Alexander Milton was assassinated by Aaron Burr to eliminate the most brilliant of American patriots. The founder of a national bank, Hamilton, and the inspirer behind a republican industrial economy. In France, the British played both extremes to maintain a civil war, supporting the Vendée uprisings and the émigrés in Koblenz against the Republic, encouraging at the same time the massacre of the Chouans by the Jacobins, organizing and financing all the feudal armies of Europe against the Republic, and creating provocations, constant provocations among the leaders of the revolution, even driving them to guillotine each other, while the army commissars enriched themselves through outbreaks of violence, control of brothels and gambling joints. This was the way they proceed. And they proceed in a way that I will show soon on what it is based. In short, the system used to divide and rule, the divide and rule method, and all forms of corruption. The men of London exploited the weakness and irrational emotions of their enemies to make them destroy one another. This is what Lyndon LaRouche has so aptly analyzed, not only as a competent historical examination, but as a warning for all of us today. It is clear, and this is what Helga Zepp-LaRouche spoke to you about, that we must change our way of thinking to put an end to a system in which deshumanization and barbarity are propagated even on our screens. The keys to escaping this are a new architecture of peace through development and mutual security on a global scale, and also with that spirit within each country of the world. Idealistic? Is it idealistic? Yes, but the alternative today is a war that could annihilate our species. So be idealistic. Be idealistic. Idealistic enough to have the realism to join the commitment of Diane Sare and her companions, comrades, and friends. They are committed to making the American Revolution universal again. And it is a matter of life or death for us all. Let me show 3 slides to make this point. First, the Garden of Delights from Hieronymus Bosch. this is a way to create in the people a domination by the sensuous and sexual perceptions in this garden of earthly delights, so they don't fight to build peace. They are lost in these artificial paradises. Then the second slide, no, not this one, the preceding one. Yes, this one. This is World War I, and it proves that it started there, the dehumanization of the battles. Now they are speaking about swarms of robots fighting against enemies and killing them. I think that this image says it by itself, where it started. Then the last is that it will remain. This is a picture from after the bombing of Hiroshima. What's left of human being is only a shadow, and it's the obliteration of humans. So this shows what you have to prevent, and we can only prevent that, if we build across the Atlantic a beautiful world for the future generations, which are, if we consider it that way, and Lyndon LaRouche was often saying it, as our real electoral basis. And they deserve what we are going to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques. And as you all have heard, the creation of the United States was an international conspiracy. And our next speaker, Chris Sare, historian, who please come up to the mic here. He and Bob Wesser just published in the latest Leonora an article on the Renaissance roots of the American Revolution, which I think all of you will very much appreciate. And Chris, I just want to give you the clicker here.
Oh, thanks so much.
There you go. Yeah. Please welcome Chris Sare.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Sounds okay, great. Well, first I want to thank Helga for beautifully delivering about half of my presentation. So I'll probably be able to keep my presentation under the proper time now. But I wanted to start with a couple of things. First of all, I do encourage people to get the latest Leonora. I'm proud of the work that Anastasia did on that. I was honored to be part of it. And it's really, and also I just want to say that a lot of what is in that article is work that people have done. Stephanie Ezrall here. So many people have done this work over the years in this movement to give people a history that has been stolen from them. And it's so critical of that. And what I got excited about doing was sort of looking at all of this different history and saying, let's put this all together in a one so that you can sort of see how the whole thing unfolds. So it's sort of a project, and I'm going to speak in the second panel on what's not in the Fidelia, in the Leonora, sorry, bringing it up to the American Revolution. But so I wanted to start with a quote from LaRouche. He says, the process of social evolution for the good, as expressed by the role of Cusa and his associates in the Great Council of Florence and its scientific expressions, was at the root of what was to become those developments in the Massachusetts of the Winthrops and the Mathers, the developments which supplied the essential distinguishing foundations of the United States of America and which have provoked its greatest achievements to the advantage of all mankind since that time. In the first section, in the first slide here, this is a Renaissance painting. And there, in the short time that I have, I want to bring out a few points about the fight that was embedded in the creation of our American Republic. It's rooted in a struggle between ideas, two different conceptions of man. One is represented by Zeus, the Olympian god Zeus, who's a tyrannical, capricious god of Olympus, and also represented by his lickspittle philosopher Aristotle, who will make excuses for him. The mindset of an evil system of empire versus one that's presented by Prometheus, who is here. And you see him flying up in this painting, flying up to steal fire from Zeus. And he brings it back down to mankind, and he gives mankind fire. He gives mankind reason. And for that, he is chained to a rock by Zeus, and he's tortured for what should be eternity as far as Zeus is concerned, to have his liver eaten out every day. Now, this, you see in the next slide here, again, a beautiful painting. And I want people to really get a sense of the Renaissance in terms of the beauty of the Renaissance, and that we should immerse ourselves in the beauty of the Renaissance. These were individuals who, in a very ugly time, in a very barbaric time, created beauty to uplift the population. But I want to point out in this specific painting of Raphael, which is in the Vatican, the two philosophers there, Plato and Aristotle. And what Aristotle says in politics, and the reason why I call them a lickspittle for the oligarchy, is he argues in book 5 of Politics, I think, those men, therefore, who are as much inferior to others as the body is to the soul, are to be disposed of thus, and the proper use of them is their bodies, in which their excellence consists. And if what I have said be true, they are slaves by nature. He then is by nature formed a slave who is qualified to become the chattel of another person. So this is the oligarch's philosopher. This is the philosophy that the empire would need to justify being an empire. On the other side, you have the example of Plato in the Meno dialogue, where he proves in a dialogue that the slave boy that he calls over to work on geometry is just as capable of reason as anybody else there, the great men of Athens around him. And then in his Republic, he destroys Thrasymachus's argument that might makes right, and that the advantage goes to the stronger. Now you say, oh, well, we all know that that's not true. We're very enlightened now. Well, you know, you look at what dominates the world right now, politically, militarily. What's going on in Israel versus Gaza? What's going on around the world? Most people actually do think that might makes right. And that's a disgusting flaw, philosophical flaw in many people alive on this planet right now. And it's something that we're going to have to change. Because what Plato shows is that justice creates unity and harmony, making it a greater source of true power and happiness as opposed to arbitrary rule. And he argues that this idea of just pure might actually puts the ruler himself in a more precarious state. These fundamental questions were taken up in the Renaissance by a handful of people who attempted to move mankind forward out of bestial slavery and ignorance. Although there are interesting and important aspects of this battle for the liberation of mankind throughout the Middle Ages, for centuries, life for the vast majority of human beings, as Hobbes would later joyfully write, was nasty, brutish, and short, with the European population barely doubling over 1,000 years. Sorry. Actually, how do I go back? There we go. Okay, so by the 1300s, two things occurred, not unrelated, which were absolutely catastrophic for Europe: the 100 Years' War and the bubonic plague. In 1337, Edward III of England's House of Plantagenet decided to launch an endless series of wars against France. The combination of the devastation of these wars and the speculation and usury of the Venetian banks plagued Europe in an economic collapse, leading to the bubonic plague. As the plague overwhelmed the people, somewhere between a quarter and a third of the population of Europe was wiped out. And you see images of this, the British troops coming in, the plague, the hell, the burning of people alive who were blamed for bringing the plague superstitiously. It's really hell on earth. So very similar to what's going on in various parts of the world like Gaza right now. So lest we think, that we've gotten away from this, unfortunately, we haven't yet. But there came a number of people, Dante, Boccaccio, and Petrarch, who decided to put themselves on the line for a Renaissance. And all three of these great Italian poets, this is from Vasari's Portrait of Six Tuscan Poets, all three wrote beautiful, in vernacular Italian, designed to lift up, to bring profound ideas and lift up the average person in Italy, to bring these ideas into the average population. And this new Italian prose and poetry was literally created by Dante in his famous Commedia, in which he took the reader from inferno through purgatory and then into the paradise of reason, all aimed at demonstrating the perfectibility of mankind. This development of a language culture was an important step in the development of a nation and its citizenry. At the same time, in Northern Europe, a Catholic deacon named Geert Groot founded the Sisters of the Common Life in the Netherlands in 1379, opening up his house to a few poor women who he then educated. Subsequently, he set up the Brethren of the Common Life in 1384, which again was committed to the idea of the education of the poor. Groot's idea was that the poor could be enabled to develop their minds which was virtually unheard of at that time, when more than 95% of the population in Europe was living in an illiterate, bestialized condition, predestined to be slaves of the oligarchs and aristocrats in power. These are his schools around. It's important for the reader to consider immersing oneself in the beautiful architecture, art, and poetry of the Renaissance, even though most Americans don't think of the Italian, Dutch, or English Renaissance as being part of America. In fact, they absolutely are. They are the source of our best traditions that were never able to take root in oligarchical Europe. Henry V, we proud few, we band of brothers, this idiot in 1415 from the House of Plantagenet invaded France. Instead of building up his own nation, England, he invaded France, and he won the Battle of Agincourt. And so in 1420, Henry moved on to conquer Paris, defeating France's Charles VI. The subsequent Treaty of Troyes made Henry V and his English progeny the present and future kings of France. When Henry died in 1422, France's Charles VII decided it wasn't going to go that way, and he disputed the English claim to the French throne, and he asserted himself to be the legitimate king of France. The military conflicts came to a head 6 years later when a young maiden from Orleans named Joan of Arc entered the scene. By then, the Burgundians, northern France, and the English were allied together against France's Charles VII, and Orleans was under siege by the British in their advance south to completely conquer France for the Plantagenet Empire. Whether Orleans was going to be broken or not would determine the outcome of this attempted conquest. 17-year-old Joan, who was heavily influenced by the monasteries associated with the Sisters of the Common Life and the Brotherhood of the Common Life, saw that Charles VII was prostate and had little or no interest in fighting back at this point to save France. She decided that she must lead the drive to defeat the British at Orléans. On April 29th, 1429, Joan entered Orléans, and on May 4th began the assault on the British troops, breaking the siege after 3 bloody days. Due to Joan's miraculous work, Charles VII was crowned the King of France at Reims in 1429. But in ensuing battles, she was captured by the Burgundians and betrayed by Charles VII, who did nothing to defend her. She was subsequently brought in front of the Inquisition under the British on charges of witchcraft and sentenced to be burned to death at the stake. There she is in the Inquisition. Importantly, the guy in the middle there, one of the first people to defend Joan was Jean Gerson, a Catholic and French Platonic scholar at the University of Paris. It was Gerson who went on to create a guide of study for the future King Louis XI that Helga was talking about earlier, Louis XI, who at that time was living in southern France, southeastern France, distraught by the cowardice of his father, Charles VII. Now, in comes Cusa. We heard from Helga these amazing quotes from 1434 in the Concordancia Catholica. 1434. Imagine that. Nicholas of Cusa says, men have been endowed with reason which distinguishes them from animals, the exact opposite of Aristotle. Therefore, by natural instinct, they have joined together to build villages, cities, they live together, they've established guardians of all these laws with powers necessary to provide for the public good. And then he says that kings, that government arises from elective concordance and free submission. So this is absolutely amazing. Do kings agree with his philosophical position at the time? Generally not. But there is and this is the dome that was completed 3 years before the Council of Florence by Brunelleschi, a beautiful, beautiful dome, lifting up the population. This is a map from Toscanelli that Helga spoke of earlier. At the same time, this was the discussion that was going on, going west. But at this point, Louis XI, who's in exile in southeastern part of France, 1447, he is the apparent heir to the throne. He's ruling in the state of Dauphiny, which borders Italy, and there he develops a direct, powerful influence and dialogue with Cusa, the Council of Florence, the Florentine Platonic Academy, the Medicis, and by 1456, Joan of Arc is exonerated, creating a massive optimism in the French population. The Burgundians then break with the English and join back with France. Louis XI moves into Burgundy, at which point he is in a dialogue with the people from the Brotherhood of the Common Life, from the Northern Renaissance. So when Charles VII dies in 1461, Louis is made King of France. In this very same year, Jasper Tudor, the uncle of the future King of England, Henry VII, becomes inspired by Louis. He leaves England to get away from the Plantagenets, and he's made a member of Louis's household. This same Jasper Tudor would bring his nephew, Henry VII, to France a decade later, where he learned firsthand the nation-building process of King Louis XI. Louis XI proceeded to take his model city-state institutions that he pioneered in Dauphiny and apply them to the entire nation of France. Postal roads, all types of industry and trade, and broke the control of the petty nobility and the many squabbling principalities and fiefdoms. All of this served to unify the nation with Louis XI as his first true king. When Louis dies in 1483, you have this protege, Henry VII, in England that overthrows Richard III, and he picks up this same nation-building conception of Louis XI in France and brings this about in England. And you have a Renaissance in England around Thomas More, Erasmus of Rotterdam, John Colet, all advisors of Henry VII, all Platonists. And, Thomas More writes Utopia, developing the idea that the government must promote the general welfare of its citizens in 1516. More asserts that to achieve these goals requires all citizens of a nation be educated in becoming Platonic philosopher kings, for it is impossible that all should be well unless all men are good. So that's utopia, but that's what we need to do. So I will just end with the go here. The problem that we're faced is that with kings, it's a crapshoot. You might get a really good one, like Henry VII, or you might get a real crappy one, Henry VIII. Henry VII, his father, gave him all of the Platonic education that one could have, but instead he was literally seduced by the Venetians and ended up marrying 6 times, chopping off the heads of a number of his wives. A real upstanding guy there. And Thomas More refused to bow to him, who had written Utopia, and you see him here on his way to the chopping block as well. So that's the problem that you have. Captain John Smith, 100 years later, inspired by this idea of the new world and creating a renaissance, attempts to do that in Virginia. That's a failure, but John Winthrop is able to secure that in the Massachusetts Bay Colony of 1630, and I'm going to pick up that story in the second panel. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris Sare. That was very enlightening. And as I've said before, you can catch that full article that he and Bob Blesser wrote in the Schiller Institute's Leonora magazine. Next, I'd like to bring up David Shavin. Please come to the podium. David Shavin recently wrote an article also in this magazine on Ben Franklin, Leibniz, on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
Yep. You need a clicker?
No, I do not click. All right. Well, there's a saying, last but not least, I can promise I'm going to speak the least. So the title, Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, subtitle, or Why There's No Reason to Be a Bastard. So the subject will be Ben Franklin, his inspiration, Gottfried Leibniz, and the concept of happiness, and in the reverse order. For the 250th birthday of America's Declaration of Independence, a decent respect for the future of mankind requires that we should declare the idea and meaning of its central concept, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How about this? John Locke, the British philosopher, was the prime influence upon the founding fathers in crafting the Declaration of Independence. And his central concept, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, was based upon Locke's life, liberty, and property. Just gussy it up. Pretty crazy, huh? But that's what's out there. And it's out there because it fits with the idea that humans are primarily greedy, and they need to make their first priority looking out for number one. How's that working? For the world to get out of the present confrontationist mode, we're going to have to do better for the next 250 years. Fortunately, our founding fathers, having experienced a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, that object recognizable as a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, they did not flinch. They addressed the despotic cancer of colonialism at the heart of that long train of abuses by bringing onto the stage of history a conception of mankind capable of eradicating that cancer. That concept originated from the idea that mankind was created in the image of the Creator. Now, it's not that we're capable of acting on the same level as the Creator, who, after all, created a universe that includes us, but rather that we're capable of acting in a divine fashion. One example, Einstein's general relativity provided a basis for beginning to unpack, among other things, how the sun, the Earth's so-called natural provider for so much of life and for so long a period, converts mass into energy. And a fusion energy-based economy, as the central pathway forward, blows away the conceit that part of the world must live in poverty. As such, nations working together for their common benefit becomes a cakewalk. Fusion, if not general relativity itself, should be political science 101 over the last century for any wannabe statesman before they even think about opening up their mouths. So mankind's divine capacity for revolutionary scientific discoveries is the key for unpacking the so-called natural mysteries that the Creator embedded into this rich universe. Unfortunately, or actually as a blessing, what is required for the flourishing of life and the avoidance of Malthusian crises over shrinking resources is just this free element of the human mind. This is not only good in general, it is actually the conception of happiness that Benjamin Franklin brought to the deliberations of the Second Continental Congress in 1775 and to the committee that he headed in 1776 to draft the Declaration of Independence. What is actually required for life is the free workings of our minds, and the Creator choosing to create a world where mankind's liberty is not just a matter of providing some entertainment for the modest amount of time we mortals are granted here on earth, but is actually necessary for life. Well, that is scientifically why the Creator is good. And that is why, according to America's too little appreciated founding father, Gottfried Leibniz, the Creator chose a happy world. He could have chosen differently. For example, the Creator could have chosen a world of automatons that never die. They do exactly what God wants all the time. Perhaps what some would call a perfect world. But that would not have been Leibniz's happy world. Leibniz's term felicitas is our term happiness. Hence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is not a laundry list of 3 nice things. Rather, for Franklin, it is a succinct account of a sufficient foundation for the unique experiment that we call the American Republic. Or as Abraham Lincoln later would say, for any nation so conceived and so dedicated. And the next part, there's millions of words written about Benjamin Franklin and his life. You'll never find anything about the next story, which will be on the homework exam. Franklin made a special trip in 1766 to the Leibniz archive in Hanover, Germany, which housed the manuscript of Leibniz's treatment of John Locke's depressing account of human nature. And also it counterposed to that Leibniz's systematic development of the creative capacities that made mankind in the image of the Creator. Leibniz had written this in 1704 as his patroness, Sophie of Hanover, was to succeed the Stuart line in ruling England. He concluded at that time that England, beset with the official ideologies of hard-cop Thomas Hobbes and soft-cop John Locke, was bankrupt of fertile ideas. And hence, they were more and more dependent upon looting the production of others, including the American colonies. In 1716, when Leibniz died, King George I refused to allow Leibniz's relatives to have his writings. Their legal suit lingered over generations. It was still ongoing in the 17 and the writings remained buried in the Hanover archive until under the control of King George I, King George II, and King George III. Finally, in 1765, two proponents of Leibniz, Baron Gerlach Adolf von Munchausen and Rudolf Erich Raspe, made the bold move to publish Leibniz's work. In London, that was considered heresy. And there, in January 1766, a public attack on that publication, and that caught, in this best of all possible worlds, that caught Benjamin Franklin's attention. He was in the middle of fighting against the Stamp Act. Finally, so Leibniz ended up, it was then that Franklin arranged to go to Hanover that June to meet with Munchausen and Raspe. Leibniz ended up spending 10 days there with them in the Leibniz collection. And today we can also celebrate the 260th anniversary of that beautiful meeting of minds. Can't go through all that now. When he returned to England, Franklin altered his lifelong strategy. He was now convinced that the British Empire was impervious to his decades-long efforts to reform it. So his political interventions took on a more bold and universal breadth. Give you just one example. In 1771, people can go read themselves, his reply to the coffeehouse orators, which is wonderful, against the chicken hawks and et cetera. In 1771, he wrote something called The Introduction to a Plan for Benefiting the New Zealanders. It came after James Cook's first 3-year expedition, and Franklin was raising funds and supporting a second journey there. It contrasted Britain, a maritime power, with the undeveloped land of New Zealand not knowing iron. He posed, quote, "Does not Providence, by these distinguishing favors of an advanced development country and a country without developments, does not Providence, by these distinguishing favors, seem to call on us to do something ourselves for the common interest of humanity? Should not Britain's leaders show, quote, gratitude to their capital G, great, capital B, great benefactor, by the only means in their power, promoting the happiness of his other children?" Is a Latin phrase which in English is to shower good things over all is divine. Then he continues on the raising the funds for James Cook's second voyage. Quote, "Many voyages have been undertaken with views of profit or of plunder, to procure some advantage to ourselves or to do some mischief to others. But a voyage is now proposed to visit a distant people on the other side of the globe, not to cheat them, not to rob them, not to seize their lands or enslave their persons, but merely to do them good and enable them, as far as in our power lies, to live as comfortably as ourselves." Not only does it seem a laudable wish that all the nations of the earth were connected by a knowledge of each other and a mutual exchange of benefits, but a commercial nation particularly should wish for a general civilization of mankind. Just a practical point. Trade is always carried on to much greater extent with people who have the arts and conveniences of life than it can be with naked savages. Conclusion, Franklin did not arrive back home to Philadelphia until April 1775. He's now the senior statesman. He then had opportunities to mentor Thomas Jefferson at the Second Continental Congress. They were together at the first two sessions. Those two sessions totaled 101 days. Then when the Congress reconvened in 1776, Franklin headed up the five-man committee set up on June 10th to draft a Declaration of Independence. On June 21st, coincidentally Leibniz's birthday, and I'm happy to add also mine, Jefferson sent Franklin a draft asking, "Will Dr. Franklin be so good as to peruse it and suggest such alterations as his more enlarged view of the subject will dictate?" Now, his reference to Franklin's more enlarged view of the subject certainly suggests that Jefferson had heard over the last days, weeks, and months of Franklin's deeper reasons for the choice of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It were well that as we embark upon the next 250 years, that our country discover that they actually had a legitimate father and an actual mission for human civilization, then instead of acting like bastards, we might come to know happiness in the fulfillment of our world historic mission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave Shavin, for that fantastic overview of a real founding father, Benjamin Franklin and Gottfried Leibniz. Thank you so much. What we're going to do now, one, I want to encourage everyone, contribute to Diane Sare's campaign. If you appreciated this meeting and this discussion and you want to see her get in office with these ideas, help support and make that happen. So I'd like to actually ask Diane Sare to come up to the podium. We're going to have a little bit of time for some question and answer. I'm going to pass over this microphone to David Shavin and Chris Sare. And lunch, as you see, is being served. So while we're taking Q&A, we can have lunch as well. So thank you very much, everyone. Here's Diane Sare.
Thank you. But wait, don't all go stuff your face immediately. I want to thank everyone for coming, everyone who has spoken, everyone who will speak. I also want to introduce three people because there's been a discussion about taking up this mantle and the question of the leadership of our nation. And there are some other candidates here. So I will ask first Brian McGinnis to stand. He is running for Congress, the 2nd District in North Carolina. And are you a Green Party candidate? Okay, good. Independent candidate. People may know Brian for having his arm broken in the U.S. Senate with the help of a despicable Senator Sheehy who shoved the guards and helped him get his arm broken in the door. So, and of course, Senator Sheehy, there's no problem with that kind of behavior from our U.S. Senate, as we know, since none of them have been identified as being named in the Epstein files, and I'm sure a number of them are. Next, we have Karen Ortiz, who is and she is running for Congress in the 12th District in New York City, Manhattan. And then finally, and you will hear from him later, my friend Jose Vega. Independent, running against that AIPAC-funded Richie Torres in the Bronx. So, yes, we have a team. And let me also say, we have the book on the fusion story with Bill Jones. That is something that Lyndon LaRouche pioneered, and we learned only recently from a FOIA request that the Anti-Defamation League and FBI teamed up to shut it down. We have also, as Anastasia said, the Leonora, which is $20 per copy, and there is an article that I wrote in the magazine as well, so get it. And then, Elliot's waving the EIRs. Are you waving EIR? Yeah, thank you. Elliot's waving EIRs, which is the news service for which many people here write, including myself on occasion. And finally, my campaign, and Anastasia was not kidding, we need funds. I am not expecting to be even offered money by AIPAC, so far I haven't. And not only that, I do not have a super PAC, which means that no individual person between now and the primaries of 2028 can give more than $3,500. So even if you are a multimillionaire, you cannot give over that amount, which also means it's the great equalizer that everybody should come as close to that $3,500 as you possibly can, and get all of your friends to do it as well. So I'll leave it there. I believe, are Jacques and Helga still on? I think what we should do, are they?
Yes.
Yes, okay. That sounded like Jacques to me. So if you have questions for them, since the food is here and we're all here, I would actually ask that we just take 10 minutes for limited Q&A, and then people can get up and talk to your friends and eat food. And I assure you there's plenty. It will not run out before you get there. So let's just take 10 minutes now, and Anastasia can come back and moderate if there's any questions. Particularly for Jacques and Helga, you'll have other opportunities to ask me and our panelists, or if you insist, I think we'll answer as well. Okay.
All right, so please raise your hand if you have a question, thoughts. I mean, we'll accept denunciations too if you really have them, but we have another microphone over here. Stuart Battle, my gracious husband, is prepared to hand them off. Also, if there's any questions online, we can also take those as well, if there's a hand raised. Oh, there's a hand there in the blue. Yeah, in the blue sweater, right there. Stuart.
Hi, I'm John Suter. Thank you for all those wonderful presentations, very educational. Do any of you think that there was a specific point in history where we started going the wrong direction? Certainly the destruction of the Glass-Steagall Act was one, but are there other points where we could have made better decisions?
Well, can I answer?
Yes, please do.
I think one big dividing line for sure is the entering of the United States on the side of the British in the First World War, on behalf of, basically ending, because the entire 19th century was very much influenced by the German classics, by Wilhelm von Humboldt in particular. The American education system in the 19th century was heavily influenced by these ideas. There was not one professor who was not somehow linked to the Humboldt tradition. You had the Latin farmers who helped greatly to elect Abraham Lincoln. So when this British phobia, or Anglophiles took over, I think that really was a watershed, because after that, the whole notion of Germany got completely bedeviled. While for example, the Schiller 100-year celebration of his day of death in 1905 in Chicago, for example, I think they still had a performance in German of one of the dramas. I think it was Wilhelm Tell, which has the Rüttli Oath, which is an echo of the Declaration of Independence. There were 4,000 people, participating. After the First World War, Germany got completely, demonized, so that many German Americans, because there were 3 major waves of immigration coming from Germany in the 19th century, that changed completely. So there were many Germans who did not dare to even write their German name, and they anglicized it. I don't want to give you many examples, but many people just changed their name to make it sound English. So I would say that for sure was one of the areas where a wrong turn was taken.
Jacques, did you want to say anything?
Yes, just a word. In the United States, it was obviously the death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt when Truman became president and sided with all the people in favor of a new Cold War against Russia. And then the assassination and murder or assassination and the death of Kennedy. And then all the domestic internal enemies of the United States moved together with the external enemies of the United States. There was a great chance before, a great moment in history for me, which was just after de Gaulle became again president in France. There was this meeting between de Gaulle, Khrushchev, Macmillan, and at the time, I think it was Kennedy. So they met in Paris. It was a time when there were three Catholic presidents. Adenauer in Germany, Pope, one of the best popes, John XIII, Kennedy, and also not obviously in England, but there was these leaders. And what they wanted is finish with this Cold War and start a new, have a new start. At this point, the American Secret Services sent a U-2 to spy on Russia. The U-2 was brought down by the Russian services, and then it broke the possibility to have a dialogue and a positive development. And then, of course, Kennedy was later assassinated. So, but in depth, if you go more in depth, what Helga said is World War I. And in World War I, it created this, the barbarity. People behaved like barbarians. And this created a change and a shift in what could have happened in the 19th century, which was a anti-colonial potential. Then after the whole thing became colonial, and we're still today with over our shoulders this colonial world, and our hope is that it will finish forever with a new architecture of common development and security. And that's a fight we are leading.
Thank you both, Jacques and Helga, for that. I think we'll take another question. Okay. So I saw one other hand back there. Yeah, let's go.
A question is Rick Sarkeesian from New Jersey. For David Shavin on the Franklin going to the, as I understand it, the in the art they put away in and hid Leibniz's critique of Locke. And Franklin found out through Munchausen that it was had been unearthed. Did Franklin write about that? Did he critique it? And is Leibniz's critique of Locke available and translated?
Yes. Locke wrote essay on
A little bit closer to your mouth.
Oh. Leibniz, John Locke had written in 1690 his essay on human understanding. Leibniz's new essay on human understanding. It's in French and it's translated and it's available. You remember the rest of your question. Very little is written about his trip to the Leibniz archives. You can see in the collected Franklin letters online. If you honed in on it, you can find clues on what's going on. The biggest evidence on the impact on Franklin, is from 1766 when he gets back to England after the trip. The English government he won the Stamp Act fight in February of 1766, and it underlined his position that there's decent people in England who can be rational and step back from real imperialistic operations. The government was changed. That government that did not properly contain the Americans was changed while he was in Germany on his visit. He comes back, he talks to Shelburne. Shelburne tells him that we're not going to allow any internal development, the Ohio Company. And Franklin, between his trip and his realization of what's retooled among the British Empire, he stops trying to reform them. The next 9 years is just a series of interventions of a very universal and broad level, like the example on New Zealand. Was there anything else to your question that I missed?
Great, thank you. I saw this young man in the white had a question here.
Hi, my name is Jensen, and I'm from the Bronx. And as part of the youth here, I was wondering when, it was said that to have a, proper nation, we need to have a body of philosophers or people that think, or at least it would seem to me that that would be the most effective way to kind of, run things. Like, what is a vote if it's uneducated, right? And I was kind of wondering, what would kind of be the approach to, kind of giving the, kind of making the people want to go vote or wanting to be a part of, the government, or wanting to, pursue this higher form of, education or these kinds of things, which I think is something that really plagues where I'm from. I see a lot of people that don't value that education or don't value these things or don't value government. What would kind of be the approach in that if we, if we aim to revolutionize the US? Yeah.
I'm going to take that, and I'll stand up so I can see. That's a really important question. And I think our nation has to have a mission for the good. When I was a child was the last time we went to the moon. And I happened to live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where Harrison Schmitt was, and he was going on that mission in 1972. And every single child in my class was obsessed. And what we got in trouble for was designing spaceships in the margins of our papers. I mean, it was it's almost hard to imagine now, but I think you can't start backwards. People say, well, what would you do about education? Well, if you have no future, what is the point of being educated? Not that we don't want to, but it takes a remarkable person to say, I'm going to become a better person, and I'm really dedicated to what? Becoming an OnlyFans star, right? So I think that we have to have a mission for the good, and that's one of the things that I think is so horrible about the American media, that they don't show what is going on in China, for example, and they don't show the development projects that China is building all over the world. Imagine if children in the United States were told, we're going to build 20 new cities in the western part of the country, or even my friend Bruce Todd, I think he's at one of these doors here, I didn't realize New Jersey, 20% of the state is pine barrens. You're not allowed to build anything. But apparently there had once been a plan to build a city there dedicated to discovering fusion energy. So imagine how that would affect younger people. So I think that things don't necessarily occur in abstract. We have to have a mission. We have to have an idea. That's the power of Jose's campaign, and maybe part of why you're working on it, is his vision for the contributions of the people of the Bronx to mankind as a whole, right? And that's what we have to be thinking of. I was very struck in Egypt, actually, El-Sisi made a point. He said the people of Egypt are going to give infinitely to mankind years ago. And I think people want that. And I think that we have a challenge on the turning point question. I'll just address that perhaps one of the most significant turning points for the worse in our lifetime was 9/11. Another one of those cases where we never bothered to get the truth, and then we plunged into war and fascism and this bizarre acceptance that it's necessary for the government to spy on your every move because that supposedly is what keeps us safe. And for people your age, we're now in the 25th anniversary of that. So we have a whole generation of younger people who never knew the United States prior to that attack. And I think the effect of it, and the effect that we didn't do anything about it, we did nonsense that it was intended to induce, like the war against Iraq and all of these wars, but we didn't ever actually find out who did it. We never decided to find out who killed Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Robert Kennedy. We didn't get justice in the LaRouche case, which is, I think, another major matter which could be addressed right now. So I think it's that combination of things. But mission is urgent, and forward mission is absolutely urgent. That's the way we can pull people together and create a future.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you for that great question. So I think what we're going to do, I know you're all hungry, we're going to go have lunch, and we will resume back here at 11:15, or at 1:15, 1:15. See you soon.